What's the
Objection, my
experience?
lord. This question is leading.
No, I'm just curious, because me, I think writers, and I'm a writer, but when thinking as an editor, I think writers are some of the most difficult people to handle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Today, I want to share with you an in-depth look at a remarkable conversation I had with Iquo DianaAbasi, a poet, a storyteller, an editor, and a literary voice whose work carries, the width of Nigerian realities and the complexities of African literature. This conversation took place over a few hours, about 2 hours, 30 minutes. And what I found was a mixture of, raw honesty, emotional reflection, and a deep insight into both the craft of writing and the difficult social and political landscape that shapes every word writers ought to be speaking, particularly as it concerns the concerns around Nigeria, around Africa. And so, right at the outset, we delved seriously and tried to look into the matter, the idea of what a writer is and how she herself, as a writer, is to be considered as a witness, a voice committed to exploring power, language, and courage, all within the broader tradition of African literature. From there, we moved on to, explore her approach to writing across different different forms, from poetry to drama to radio, from poetry to prose to radio drama, screenwriting, as well as looking at how each comes with its own, demands. And she told me here that she doesn't start with a fixed idea of which form she will use. Sometimes she begins to write expecting to tell a story, only to realize that what wants to be told is a poem. And when anxiety or pain fuel the emotion, poetry frequently becomes the natural vessel that we get to see from her works down here.
In the beginning, I used to only write poems, but then I started writing stories, and I just let myself go and see how the subject matter opens up to me. There are times, however, that once I begin to write, I know I might want, for instance, to tell a story, but I sit down and I realize the story isn't coming. Instead, it's going to be a poem, and I honor it by writing the poem as it comes to me. Um, so yes, that's for poetry and prose. If I, however, decide, okay, I really, really just want to write a poem, I then I have to now sit and think, okay, this is, what am I writing? How's this poem coming to me? What emotions does it evoke? Is it anger? Is it joy? Is it pain? Is it anxiety? And oftentimes I find that when the emotion is anxiety, it's often easier to write it as poetry. I don't know. um, Not that joy doesn't bring poems. It's just oftentimes that's what happens with me when it's anxiety or pain.
The conversation here was revealing as she opened up to tell us in and about herself. It showed the flexibility and intuition required in creative process. Poetry for her is a spontaneous raw outpouring. Prose can be more structured but always deeply connected to the feeling behind the words. And in and about that, the shift goes to radio drama, which was another fascinating moment. And she described the unique challenge of writing exclusively for the ear, as she called it. Unlike prose or visual media, radio demands that every word be precise, every sentence carry the weight of setting a scene, a character, and emotion without, visual clues.
When I have to do radio drama, maybe this is because I was doing that to earn a living. It's a different, it's somewhat different set of skills. So yes, there's a storytelling skill, but there's also the fact that writing for radio entails writing for the ear and only the ear. Because if you're listening to a radio drama, for instance, you're not watching with your eyes, so you cannot see the actors' thoughts or emotions on their facial expressions. You can only hear them. So before the actor's voice skills, it has to be that the story is told in a way that the specific words that I used hit the ear, and then still find a way to paint the picture you the writer wanted to paint. Without, so it's a very specific set of skills. You're not allowed to build, the way you would if you were writing a story in an or a novel.
And it goes to tell you what many radio script writers tend to go through as to convey the message to the people. Because if you look at it critically, it is not a thing you get to see with your eyes. Her words, gave me a glimpse into how a writer must master not only language but sound and timing. Scenes have to flow seamlessly. There is no room for delay or unnecessary detail. Every scene feeds directly into the next, and this was what she tried to explain to me. And then this was a moment for me also, where the conversation deepened beyond technique into the demands of Survivor, when we started talking about the Nigerian situation, and it flowed seamlessly. We didn't push it. We didn't even know we were really talking about it, and what we're talking about, the idea of making a living as a writer within Nigeria's challenging environment. And about that, we also looked at the most emotionally intense part of the conversation, the discussion of how Nigeria's endless crisis, like mental health of hers, of mine. And she spoke, candidly about the impossibility of ignoring the daily news and social media, where stories of violence and suffering are relentless.
When I first heard about the killings in Benue, I didn't want to process it. I didn't want to think too much about it. But I have friends who are from Benue. I know people who still live in Benue, who work in Benue. Even if I'm not close to them, I'm close to people who have family there. And I remember the thing just made me remember there was a New Year Day massacre that happened. Now I forget the year because so many have happened.
Yeah.
But I recall when I heard that news, and I remember I read newspaper articles. I mean, I was in Lagos then. Lagos is so far from Benue, but we are in one country. I remember reading the newspaper and wondering to myself how the people the victims who had not died, how they would live after that day.
She shared the story of Benue Massacre. I shared also my take on that in vivid details, a story that haunted her, a story that haunts everybody who thinks and who has a heart, a story that ought to move everybody, and a story that moved her, to write poetry as a form of bearing witness in different times. And it's a lot, and it takes a lot to not listen. It takes a lot not to really pay attention to this particular situation, to know that, one way or the other, I cannot run away from this particular event. This is me, this is who I am, this is where I find myself at the moment, and we ought to really look at it clearly.
And then I remember writing a poem. the staccato was no firework. And when I first drafted that poem, I knew, because I wasn't there, I wasn't in that location when it happened. This was me responding to the things I had heard that had happened there. It was almost as if I was seeing people who woke in the middle of the night and were hearing what could have been fireworks because it was New Year's Day. But it turned out it was a massacre. There was a woman I read about in the newspaper who was running with her child. But she was in hospital when she was being interviewed, and she had lost an eye, And so for me, I was just imagining how it would have been for that woman to run with a toddler, or a child who's about a year, and then strap the child to your back and just start running. Because you don't even know where to run to. You might be seeing fire from down there on the other side, and you're thinking, let me run away from the fire. You don't know just how close it is. And because there's fire, there's smoke, everywhere is dark. You don't know. All you're seeing, you're seeing people running and people shouting. You don't know that maybe the person who's running not far away is your attacker. You do not know that there will be a gunshot. You're hearing this noise, this loud noise. And then it was as if I was there seeing that. And that's what I wrote in that poem. But you see, the next noise she heard was a gunshot that took away her eye. And then there was somebody who was supposed to be a security guard, and they were supposed to be doing some kind of vigilante security, but they didn't have guns. The marauders had guns and other things. And I remember imagining, so if this person had left his wife and child at home, and then they have another child maybe in boarding school, or the child had returned and he hadn't seen it, I was just imagining what these people's lives could have been before they were cut short.
Her voice carry, the weight of that horror. You can come to see the sense of loss down here, a way to bring light to a tragedy often ignored. A discussion then went towards leadership. It was a way to not just point out problems. We looked at those charged with the gift of leadership, and here we criticized the president's delay and flippant response to the massacre in Benue, noting how this deepened the wound rather than healing it.
The numbers were staggering. I couldn't even. I'm like, okay, maybe the numbers are exaggerated, but the truth is, I know those numbers that were even on the news were probably less than the real numbers. Yes. And then I'm trying not to think about it too much. And then I see our president's speech days after, and I'm unable to watch to the end because I cannot for the life of me understand why a human being would talk like that after people have been killed.
Like an afterthought, and as though
Yes.
I'm going to
the response
reconsider
is
my
incomprehensible.
schedule and see if I'm going to put you guys in this. And even after that, I am not even going to get to the particular location. I will just end in a particular part of the state, and you guys can sort yourself out. And
The flippancy with which, he was suggesting, try and live in peace with your brothers. What is that? Like, is this the first time this has happened? Do you not feel a sense of responsibility? Even, for me, the president's speech is one thing. It didn't even come immediately the thing happened. It took you long enough.
yeah, the
You
Pope
then had to
had a
sound like you're
prayer.
doing people a favor.
The Pope even had a prayer for them, said even before the president could say something.
And we also looked at children being asked to come and wave at the president. And
no, it's not bad enough that we're watching little children stand in the rain and dance.
I saw that one from New Central to Arise, and I'm like,
okay, how are they even covering this thing? But I realized they have to cover it to actually, in case you don't know the country you're living in, so you see what's happening. But how did people allow children do that? How? For what?
To welcome, and
What are you welcoming?
banners.
For what?
What's the banner
Why does he
for?
need a welcome? Why do we do this to ourselves? So we are like a people that you are being beaten, yet you are smiling and saying, "Beat me some more. Beat me some more. I'm enjoying it." I can't understand it anymore.
It shouldn't have been like that, but many persons just felt, oh, that's a normal thing in Nigeria. And this part of the conversation, was raw and painful for me to get to listen to. But it also reflected the frustration felt by many Nigerians, a frustration born not just from political failure, but from fundamental disconnect between those in power and the realities of the people.
You want to pretend it's not happening. You want to ignore it, but you can't. You can't. Because at the end of the day, you are still a Nigerian. These are human beings. And I promise you, if this thing happened in Guatemala, I would still be affected because these are human beings. How much more my own people?
It's a lot that we are not really like thinking about this particular aspect of it, that our leaders are almost not listening to us almost anymore. And
when people are suffering, we cannot then come together and say, let's speak against this injustice, because we're too busy looking for food to eat, too busy looking for how to light up our house. Even if you just to buy 5 liters of fuel, put in a small generator and put on the fan. We're too busy looking for how to make ends meet. Food is right. Cost of petrol is rising. Cost of food is rising. We're too busy trying to think of those things.
And with that, our conversation, deepened.
You can't go to work without spending half of your salary in 2 weeks. People are too busy. People are suffering. If somebody falls ill, you don't even know if the person will ever get better because you can't afford to go to hospital. There's so many things wrong. It just feels like some people are happy with the systemic rot, that keeps the citizens running around, blindly. Even so, you think it might be happening in front of them. We can't even see it.
She took me into the heart of Nigeria's contradictions.
I just feel like there's so many things that are going wrong, and people in power are just happy to maintain the status quo, because when that status quo is like that, people can't question them, or demand better service from them. And it's so sad. It's so saddening for me.
Here we deliberated on the beauty and the brutality of what it means to be Nigerian, what it means to be living currently wherever you are. When you look at beauty on one hand, you look at also a sense of brutality down there. When you look at potential here, you look at pain on the other side. And for her, she described, the country not as a monolith, but as a layered, complex whole that no single story can fully capture. And I agree with her. She spoke about the roads forever under perpetual destruction. The road under perpetual destruction, and the skyrocketing, price of basic goods like gari, once a poor man's food, now a luxury, and the daily struggle with electricity and fuel shortages. Her words painted a picture of a society caught in a constant state of survival. On the one hand, you see kindness as a precious commodity, and on the other hand, you see people just giving up on the sense of wanting to be kind, and you begin to ask yourself, why are people that way? But you cannot really blame many persons for the decisions they get to take, because what do you want them to do? Should they stop being who they are just so you can be who you want to be?
Many things are going wrong, and people in power are just happy to maintain the status quo, because when that status quo is like that, people can't question them, or demand better service from them.
This balance between hardship and humanity was a recurring theme throughout the interview. She insisted that writing about Nigeria means embracing all of this, the kindness and cruelty, the generosity and the greed on the other hand. And she'll make us to come to understand and believe that, we are everything. We are both what we want to accept and what we don't want to accept.
I just feel like there's so many things are going wrong, and people in power are just happy to maintain that status quo, because when that status quo is like that, people can't question them or demand better service from them.
And so this nuance, view rejects simplistic portrayals and demands a truthful, layered approach to, storytelling. And what does this mean? It means, and it holds that we cannot continue to just tell ourselves, this part of Nigeria is this, that part is that, and then we want to hold on to that and move on to that. No, we cannot do that.
Okada books.
Yeah.
Okada books hits me left, right, center. I'm like,
the young man tried though. Let's give it to him. He tried.
The discussion moved to, literature and publishing. Vital but challenging arenas for Nigerian writers. She shared her experience in editing for Minana, an African speculative fiction magazine with over 10 years of publication, and the whole idea of how to run this. Here she gets to explain the immense challenges faced by literary platforms in Nigeria, and it takes a lot to run these platforms, and many persons don't really get to see these things, but that is the truth. It takes a lot to run these platforms, and it takes grace to really want to do these things well.
Things are really difficult. So I think it's not easy to run such a thing in Nigeria. If maybe the founder gets a chance to get a really, like I said, if you have a really good job, and then you can fund other people and push them to do the work amidst all the hiccups you face. Yeah, but it's really, really not easy.
And I was struck by the tension between, passion and practical obstacles. And here she goes on to describe how personal funds often keep such projects afloat, with contributors receiving token payments, and how difficult it is to maintain regular publishing schedules without steady supply. And
we are 10 years last year, so it's been a lot of work.
we talked about, the dilemma of paywalls, how charging readers might, secure funds but exclude many African readers who can't, afford to pay. Balancing accessibility with sustainability is an ongoing struggle, and it's a conversation many persons are afraid to have.
Things are really difficult, but I think that even when some platforms are not able to continue publishing frequently, others are springing up, and I think it's sad when a platform you cannot find the platform to find where you publish the story or poem.
And on publishing, she was refreshingly honest about the realities Nigerian writers face. Poetry in particular, remains difficult to publish, often deemed unprofitable, and not just a Nigerian thing. It's a thing that has been there for a very, very long time. Just like people asking if philosophy bakes bread, as to say what a philosopher is meant to do in society to make ends meet. So many authors, get to turn to self-publishing or international platforms.
When thinking as an editor, I think writers are some of the most difficult people to handle.
Okay.
Yeah, when you're editing their work. So I don't think the Nigerian thing. I think writers just get so attached to their work.
Yep.
They don't want to kill the babies. Sometimes you need to lose some things. It's difficult for us to do.
And you You sit down and you ask yourself, for a country of over 220 million people, what is stopping us? What is really stopping us from making those projects and progress we think we ordinarily should be making, and why are we not making that?
For anybody who would like to publish, it's that journey is it's arduous, but it's totally worth it, because somebody might read your words and then might be inspired or might be strengthened in a resolve that they had almost let go of. But just because of your words, they are further strengthened. Or people just feel seen having read your work. I've had stories, for instance, that people read and they'll be like, I read that story and I felt so seen. Because I have experienced something like this, and I thought nobody understood it. But just reading from you gave me hope.
This insight made me, appreciate how much invisible labor underpins every, published book or poem.
Publishing is a business. The business can decide that it's going to run different models.
Equals kind of extended to contracts and vanity publishing. She explained that some publishers run different imprints, including paid publishing options.
Like I said, there's a traditional publishing
With the
contract.
contract, yeah, the normal one.
Yes, all of them have contracts.
Of
They're just
course,
different kinds of contracts.
Sure.
The traditional publishing contract is that the publisher likes your work. Maybe you pitched, you send them a
An
pitch,
accept or
and they
something.
like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, we'd like to publish this. We can line it up to publish you in the next 3 years.
Sure.
Or in the next 2 years. These are the books we have lined up coming up. We think we would have to get to you by 2 years, 3 years from now. In the meantime, we can start editing. Is it complete? Let's see the full manuscript. Then we can, edit, and then that can happen.
It's important for writers to get to understand their contracts and what they are getting into.
They would also discuss with you what the royalty is going to look like. How much are given as advance royalties, and how much royalties you would get, what percentage you'd get after that. So all of that is a conversation. This is where the publisher is taking you as a brand that they want to put their weight behind, right?
So we don't continue to hear the problems we hear sometimes of lack of getting access to rights and not getting access to particular rights. So let's say the Nigerian copy or the Nigerian editions or the Nigerian rights and all that. And
then a publisher can see your work and say, okay, thank you for submitting to us, but this doesn't quite fit what we do right now. However, if you'd like to enter into a different kind of contract with us, so you can decide that you're going to share the cost of the publishing. You can decide that you're going to pay for the publishing, in which case you will pay. They will recommend editors for you. You would pay the editors. When you're done working with the editors, they will then give you a costing for what the book will look like. Certain number of pages, certain quality of paper, they would give you those options.
it was very, very deep and intense down here.
But it's a different imprint, so there's nothing illegal about it. Some publishers they use one name to print certain genres.
Sure.
They use a different name to print other genres. They also use a different name or imprint to print things that are vanity published. So you are
see,
the one
in
paying.
Random House gets to have, there's the ABBA House inside
Yes, so
Random House still and all
it's
that.
under them, it's their imprint. So it's the same quality they are giving you, but it's a different range of services. There's nothing wrong with that.
Overall, this transparency remains crucial advice for emerging writers navigating, a complicated landscape.
It's for you to understand what you are getting into and decide, this is what I want to do. Sometimes it has its perks. If, for instance, the publisher has a good distribution network, that means as you're sending their book across the country, or maybe they even have connections outside the country and they go for book festivals, literary festivals, and you'll be in their stand as their author. Nobody needs to know that you're not the author.
Behind, yeah.
So there are different levels to this thing. Sometimes there are people who have money and they're like, I don't want to wait 3 years till you're ready. I want to publish my book now. I want to publish it and I'm going to have a big, grand launch. My launch is going to be like a big show. I'm going to have music performances. I'm going to have drama. I'm going to, and I'm going to reap, because they know whatever money they spent to do the editing and printing and publicity that they've done, they will reap it at their launch. There are people, there are writers like that who have that kind of backing, and but they would like to do it with a publisher who is grounded.
Sure.
That also happens. So there's nothing illegal about it. It's just to understand what you're getting into.
And towards the end, the tone shifted to, personal reflection. Iquo talked about still becoming, that her work and voice continue to evolve, continue to be shaped by, political realities and personal growth.
Nobody cares.
It's not important. Can you make money from books? Can you inflate a budget for books?
And
How
they were,
much will you make from it compared
how do you
to
make public fraud from there? Everybody
Yes,
knows the price, how
it's,
books are sold.
it's not much value public fraud wise, so they won't invest money in it.
So you
And this
rather
is
go
such a
get
sad
road
thing for me
contracts.
to say. Yeah.
We're always awarding roads. Like since I was born to you now, they have been building roads or destroying roads.
Don't go there.
Like
Don't.
like they have been building roads since I was born. Since my father was born and now he's no longer here. They have been building roads.
I told you, the roads are under constant destruction. I told you this thing.
And like that, we tend to see how she has come to evolve over time, and it's a lot down there.
So now if you wanted to do a road trip from the east to the west of Nigeria, would
2 days.
really, because apart from the bad roads, you'll also be thinking about getting kidnapped.
Sure.
You don't have to be rich to be kidnapped in Nigeria,
Why do you need to be rich? If you have money to board a bus.
Ordinary bus.
Her dedication to telling Nigerian stories in all their horror, in all their joys and complexity remains steadfast even from afar.
So it's such a risk now. I didn't know I liked traveling until I started traveling, It is so beautiful to sit in a car on a bus and see nature unfold around you. To stop by some community and you see how like you can tell the people in this community, the way they think, just because maybe they've displayed wares and counted, they are not even standing there like in the sun waiting for you to come
Social
by.
security. It's
and
like
I'm thinking,
safe.
how are they doing this? So it's almost like you're from a different country because you don't think the way these people think. And I find it so intriguing.
Though she has not lived in Nigeria for nearly 3 years now, her connection to her people, my people, our people and our culture is still very, very strong.
From Ugep to Ikom through when you're heading to Ogoja, you see those people in Nekbogrinya and Mbok. They keep these things, even in Abakaliki, at least then, I don't know of now. I barely used flight while I was in Nigeria because one, I used to travel only when I really have the time to what will I say, time to waste, which was not time wasted anyways, because it granted me time to and I loved it whenever we stopped on the road almost all the time. And
finally, we touched on the resilience and humor Nigerians used to survive. And we came to agree that Nigerians should be given medals.
So Nigerians, we all deserve medals, but I don't know how we do it. I don't.
Seriously.
This conversation didn't just touch only on literature or politics. It was born out of human story about endurance, creativity, and hope amidst adversity. As our time drew to its close, we took on a reflective and almost tender quality. She shared what it means to keep writing despite the overwhelming challenges of life and country. How writing is not just a craft but a gift, a lifeline and a call. And many persons ought to come to fuel this desire within themselves in order for them to move on. Else, it will be a problem for many persons to move on in the future. We ought to know how to move. We ought to know how to navigate. We spoke about the importance of mentorship, nurturing younger writers. I should describe her role mentoring emerging voices, and I hope that new platforms will, continue to rise.
We have new magazines coming up every day, and a platform is a platform. I'm just happy when I see platforms where young African, especially Nigerian writers, can publish.
Even though each one faces funding struggles and infrastructural barriers, you cannot help but want to come to think about the fact that we ought to be writing, we ought to be reading, we ought to keep our minds conscious and the society going. And I was struck by how much her vision is not just about her own work, but about community, about growth and about legacy. She also spoke with warmth about the people around her, family, friends, fellow writers, who have supported and inspired her, despite the loneliness of exile to a large extent. The distance from home and the pain of watching her country struggling, our country. She remains connected and committed.
I miss Nigeria every day. I want to go home. I really want to. I can't lie about this, folks.
We all miss Nigeria. We all miss Nigeria. We all want to be back in Nigeria. But that is a conversation for another day. In these moments, the conversation felt deeply human. It was the story of a woman who refuses to be silenced or disillusioned, who channels sorrow into creativity, frustration into courage, and despair into hope. We also discussed the broader, cultural landscape, how humor and memes, for example, serve as a kind of social commentary and collective resilience. We've talked about this before.
So Nigerians, we all deserve medals, but I don't know how we do it.
And I can't tell you how proud I am of being a Nigerian. And what was on our final topic? There were lots of stuff to talk about, and it ended with the whole idea of becoming. And so Nigeria's literature is becoming. She will continue to remind me that stories, matter. They can inspire, they can strengthen, resolve, and help people, feel seen. And this she knows how to equally, weave around and then point you to look at things you maybe at the moment are not seeing. Before we said goodbye, she expressed appreciation for the conversation. And so what started as an interview became a meaningful exchange, between two people deeply invested in storytelling and in truth. Myself as a philosopher and a podcaster, and herself as a writer, editor, and as an artist.
It was not a boring conversation, by the way.
Wow, thank you for saying that.
That lifted my heart.
Thank you that this has not been a boring conversation for you.
And indeed, it was anything but. It was me meeting a woman and me listening to her give us a sense of power, the power of literature, the power to conquer pain and beauty, to reflect society honestly, to reflect about society equally, to look at, what poems ought to be, what stories ought to be, how they ought to be, living testaments to how grappling our lives ought to be around us and everywhere, demanding change and sharing their truth. And so in the final end, I am grateful to Iquo DianaAbasi for honesty, courage, and for inviting us into our world. And May her words and those of all writers committed to truth continue to inspire us to see Nigeria not as a monolith, but as a complex, vibrant, living story still unfolding. Thank you for joining me in this behind the scenes journey through a conversation that was at once difficult, inspiring, and at the same time necessary. See you next time.